I guess the last thing we have on the agenda for cooperative related news before we get into some more detailed conversation, some of the things that you're bringing to the table this evening, is Crepegate.
Yeah.
If you are not on Twitter and following obnoxious local issues, Crepegate is something that kind of came to the fore recently. There's a contract was up for the for being food concessioner at the airport, which is owned by the city of Burlington, and the winning bid was from the Skinny Pancake, which has the restaurant in downtown, and the same owner also owns the Chubby Muffin, which is in the Old North End. So there'll be both a Chubby Muffin and 2 Skinny Pancake locations in the new in the airport. But what really sort of stirred up the controversy was that the Skinny Pancake was given an exemption to Burlington's livable wage ordinance, which says basically everyone who contracts with the city has to pay their employees what's considered a livable wage, which is like 13 something an hour if you include benefits, and without benefits like 17 something an hour. And this has been framed as kind of by, there's been people who have been back and forth on this issue, sort of. Some people have been framing it as kind of an attack on the livable wage ordinance. Other people are saying, well, this is kind of like, this is an appropriate exception because this is a business that uses a lot of local foods, local products, really sort of supporting the local economy, does a lot of socially responsible things for a company versus someone like Dunkin' Donuts, which said that they wouldn't meet the livable wage ordinance, but is sourcing lower quality GMO, all the things you don't want in your food. So it's been a really interesting discussion that's been gone on publicly around it. Do you guys have any thoughts on it before we jump into the cooperative connection?
Just quickly, do you know if you mentioned a competing bid there? Did they actually say that they would meet the living wage ordinance? Yeah. The way I understood it is that all the competitors made 2 bids with the living wage ordinance, and one with the living wage ordinance, one without the living wage ordinance.
My information is only from the Burlington Free Press article,
okay.
which talked about the other companies actually saying that they put the bid in with the living wage ordinance as well, but then Skinny Pancake in theirs would say we can't meet that requirement. If you're going to have us there, then we would need an exemption.
I think it was there were 4 different organizations bidding for it, and I think it was 2 said that they would meet it, and then two would asked for exemptions, and Skinny Pancake is one of the 2 that asked for an exemption.
Okay.
But so in the kind of damage control around this, the owner of the Skinny Pancake took to his Facebook page and made and basically sort of was answering people's questions and concerns as they posted them. And so actually there's another event that's coming up that is the Vermont Employee Ownership Centers. They're doing a workshop on business succession. So rather than like giving your business to your children or selling your business to a corporation, selling it to the employees, and kind of the different models how to do it. The workshop's actually this coming Wednesday, December 5th, at the Gardner Supply in Burlington, which is an employee-owned company through an employee stock ownership plan. So I posted that to the Facebook page, and the owner responded saying, actually have sort of, employee ownership is my pie-in-the-sky exit plan. There's clearly a problem with socially responsible exit plans when you see how Ben & Jerry's sold to Unilever. Since we were privately held, we have the ability to do this. Because Ben & Jerry's was publicly held, they had to act in the interest of the shareholders. There are a lot of things that are not in the financial interest of the shareholders, donating 1% of their sales to environmental nonprofits, go to the airport with lesser margins and higher costs because of the local foods mission. We also act much more quickly because we do not need permission from many people and decisions, which helps us grow the biz. But ultimately, the greatest way to keep it local would be to sell back to our employees. I don't expect to do this for a decade or more, but it's on my radar as an idealistic way to exit. So thanks for sharing. So I felt like that was an interesting response and perhaps one way of addressing the concerns about the Skinny Pancake being essentially used to to undermine the livable wage ordinance. But do you guys have thoughts on this?
Just a sort of a general thought that it's sort of a sad commentary on where American workers are, that we need to have a livable wage ordinance in the first place. That the majority of businesses wouldn't realize that they're, paying their workers a livable wage doesn't actually help their bottom line by having a more productive workforce. And so I think that in itself is just a huge sort of thing to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, this situation, it reminds me of something we were talking about a little bit earlier before the show started, about my experience in Philadelphia working with the Carpenters Union. And it was a similar idea where the idea of wages or creating a minimum wage is very rooted in this kind of old model of an economy, right? It's rooted in this idea that like there is an owning class, there are owners of businesses, and then there's kind of like a workforce that then they kind of pay what the minimum that they can, and that the government steps in to kind of care after if there's any abuses or kind of if the compensation is just deemed too low. But the idea of wages is that it's rooted in the antagonism of this kind of working class and this ownership class. And so I think that what you brought up was really right on point, which is if we're thinking about the new economy, if we're thinking about moving forward and building a sustainable Vermont, this is the exact thing this is a changing of the conversation. Right now, the conversation is sitting inside of the livable wage. It's an old paradigm to have the talk. It's saying, all right, well, workers should be getting X amount because that's the that's a minimum standard of living that we deem is good because we're a socially progressive state like Vermont. Still an old discussion. What you guys are talking about here is great, which is saying we actually want to be talking about how to remove ourselves from this false kind of binary between workers and owners and actually create workers into owners and see how they can align incentives in the right way. So I think it's great. And so I realized I didn't actually link back to the labor unions. But so what was always interesting to me is that in a lot of the trades unions, the unions themselves are the ones that manage the pension funds. So a lot of the workers as they work then kind of pay into those pension funds, and that's invested. But then the leadership of the union is negotiating for the terms of all of the big developments with the large-scale developers in the city in Philadelphia. So in one side, they have this big pot of money that's getting invested somewhere, and then in their daily practice, they're sitting there negotiating for like that little extra wage that they can get for their members. And so then thinking about it in this new paradigm would be, well, we have this pot of money, developers are investing in the city, what if we are the developers and we invest in the city and then we pay ourselves a living wage that we think is appropriate, but then we kind of align our incentives such that we are actually getting the full kind of benefit of our work, full compensation. So I just think that's right on scale with thinking forwardly. So nice post on the Facebook.
Well, one other thing that I think that this sort of brought up for me is within the cooperative movement, I think one of the, when you have a going concern, oftentimes co-ops have these well-documented like business literature advantages over other forms of ownership, because you're really sort of bringing people sort of wider bases of people in who have a real like literal investment in the success of the firm. It's like if your actions, if you're just being paid a wage, if you work a little bit harder, a little bit less hard, you're not going to be rewarded more or less. But if you're, have a sense that, okay, if I have an idea and instead of just like sitting on it or just being like, oh, that would be good, but it would be a pain to like bring it up and I wouldn't be compensated for it. If it's like, oh, this will make you're an employee and this will make like the business more efficient, then there's no reason not to. You make the business more efficient and everyone in the concern benefits. But sort of one of the issues that I think the cooperative movement has in terms of its expansion is there's sort of this entrepreneurship problem, where if a single person starts a cooperative business, it can, you can do it kind of altruistically, but it's oftentimes a few individuals taking a lot of risk and then people coming on later who can buy in for the equal amount. Same, it's sort of a relatively small buy-in, but then can benefit from its existence without having borne the same amount of risk. And so I think this skinny pancake example offers a really interesting opportunity for kind of a model of cooperative ownership in which, unlike a lot of kind of socialist models, you don't completely eliminate the idea of the individual entrepreneur taking risk and then getting a reward for it, but rather sort of creating a norm around a different path of succession, where like right now the entrepreneurial dream is that, okay, I start a business, it gets really good, and then a corporation comes in and offers me $50 million to buy my idea. I take the money and hurrah, I've like won America. But like kind of creating this other model, perhaps more meaningful model of, you have this idea, you start it, you bring other people in, and then you sell to your workers as your exit, and then maybe even instead of just selling to them and leaving, you sort of share ownership and become part of this community that you value. You create a workspace and a project that you find valuable. You decide to join it as a peer rather than, and then you get compensated for the risk that you took being the entrepreneur with kind of a one-time sort of payout when the workers buy it from you, but then and then you could potentially use that if you're just an entrepreneurial person who likes starting new things to start your next one. But I think that's an interesting model for building the cooperative economy that sort of has a place for both kind of individual initiative and collective effort. And I think that, if the owner of Skinny Pancake does follow this path that he's outlined, like he could be kind of blazing a trail and creating a model that other people could follow.
For sure.
Aren't at the moment simply because of lack of imagination or lack of an idea that can be done.
And one idea with that is to actually tier that in over time. So especially like, okay, you put all of this sweat equity into building this company, into kind of creating Skinny Pancake into the image that it has. Thinking about just giving it to the workers in like one fell swoop is oftentimes like a blow, because the Skinny Pancake is then like part of an identity, like the company that's created is part of the identity of the entrepreneur. So that as workers kind of phase in over time, so it's like, okay, you've worked there 1 year, then you have the ability to have like a 0.5% ownership or 1%. It depends how big we're talking about. But then for each year that a person is there, being able to scale that in so that instead of having to work at all the legal stuff in 1 year, you talk about a 10-year phase-out plan where that person can kind of continue to have that larger share. So we don't have to think about co-ops as everybody has 25%. There's 4 people, and great. And if the owner starts off and it's like, oh, it's employee-owned, but there's pieces that you gradually increase with. There's a few folks that are doing that with coffee shops, actually. A guy I met last June who's got a coffee shop out actually in the Midwest, and my buddy down in Philadelphia. And that's his plan, is he wanted to start a coffee shop, so he's got a vegan coffee shop in South Philly, the Grindcore House. It's a really amazing place for anybody that goes to Philadelphia. You can like them on Facebook as well. But his long-term plan is to figure out how do you turn that over to workers, and he's really been trying to think actively about that. And so really looking for resources, because there isn't really that, that resource for owners who want to think about another transition plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really lucky in Vermont to have the Vermont Employee Ownership Center here as a resource for people to sort of tap into. But yeah, and I think Don Jamieson again will be at the Vermont New Employee
Nice.
Our new economy conference is coming up on Friday, and hopefully we'll be having him on the show in the next few months. Our schedule is starting to get pretty booked, which is a good thing, but
Where that conference is happening too, at Gardner Supply. I mean, that's a place where that's actually happened. It's not a cooperative; it's an employee stock ownership plan, but where the founder did sell that to his workers.
Yeah, and there's a couple of like fairly major Vermont companies that have done that. Let's see, King Arthur Flour is employee owned, and what was it? There's one other that I'm trying to remember. There's a company that grinds lenses. That's like does some like really high end kind of like engineering of like creating like scientific lenses for scientific instruments in Vermont, like Spectra or something like that. But I know that they also sold to their employees as an ESOP. So
Don Schramm's company as well, Data Systems.
Yeah. So it's there's a good mix and a good number of organizations that have done it. So it's not an entirely uncharted path, but nonetheless, it's still, I think, it's still one of those models that is that's much less known about and used than others. And I think a lot just there needs to be a lot of educational work around that to
For
get people
sure.
thinking about that that's a possibility. But yeah, and I think also it's like, you know, it's not just education for owners of businesses, but for employees as well, because, you know, one of the things I think that the cooperative movement struggles with, and this is something that goes beyond worker co-ops, this is something that's true in all co-ops, is that like the dominant institutions of our society socialize people to certain roles. And so, for instance, in the case of a credit union or a bank, people will go in, or a food co-op versus a grocery store. People are socialized in banks and grocery stores to be customers. And customer has like all of this kind of array of this array of behaviors and like attitudes that you sort of expect as a customer. You're oppositional to the person you're buying from. You know, you're each trying to get the best deal. There's all these things that are just kind of you're socialized into. It's like starting as a young child and going right along. You bring that with you into adulthood. And then when you go into a credit union or a food co-op, and suddenly it's like, wait, I own this place. I don't actually have to be in an oppositional relationship. You know, if City Market makes a profit off of what I spend there, I get a check at the end of the year. That changes the relationship, but I think it takes even if you're interested in co-ops, it can take a while to like get used to what that really means, because it's so tempting to simply fall back on the schemas, the sort of models that you were taught, and that are the ones that are kind of usual and expected in society. And I think it's the same thing with sort of an employee versus a member, kind of a member owner. You know, it takes a little while for someone to move from the relationships and the power dynamics and all of those things that are inherent to being an employee into this role of kind of collaborative owner who also works there. And you're going to behave, once you understand what your incentives are and sort of what the culture is, like you're going to behave differently. And, you know, again, the research shows that employee-owned firms tend to perform better than traditionally owned firms because of that. But, you know, there's this transition where people have to actually like relearn a whole new way of being.
That's true. That's important.
So I think that the skinny pancake will be definitely on our radar going forward, seeing how this progresses.